Hey Jay, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
I'm doing good, bro. By the way, it's a pleasure to talk to you finally. I watch a lot of your stuff, but for reference, I'm an ex-Muslim, but I just had a few questions about religion if you could try to answer
Okay.
from an academic lens or anything. But essentially, I've been looking into Orthodoxy and studying it as best as I could, right? And so it's contingent upon the Old Testament, right? And so when people I think you mentioned once, or someone, maybe Dr. Bo Branson, someone mentioned that it's okay to have the position that the Bible, maybe the Old Testament, can have scribal errors, and that doesn't really, because I'm coming from an Islamic background, so the idea, right, is that if there's scribal errors,
Yeah, I think most people, except for independent fundamentalist Baptists, believe and admit there are scribal errors, because there's no guarantee that the later manuscript copies would be inerrant, and we don't even what we believe are inerrant and infallible would be what's called the autographa, and that would be the ones that Paul himself wrote. But because we are not worshiping a book, we trust that the church guided and preserved the tradition in general.
I see what you're saying. And so, okay. And so my question would be, if the Israelites would eventually come to kind of play with the religion where you get more of a rabbinic Judaism than the ancient Judaism, why can we trust their oral transmission on scripture? Right? I guess would be my question. Would it go back to the church, is what you say?
Well, they're two different things, because we know in the Gospels, for example, in Matthew 23, Jesus appeals to tradition that's not explicit in the Old Testament. So, for example, he says that the scribes and the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses, and so they have the authority of Moses, but there's nothing in the Old Testament specifically that talks about a succession or a seat of Moses. So he's appealing to a valid tradition. And even in the Old Testament, you had this idea of, Isaiah says, for example, to the law and to the testimony. So the law would be the written text. The testimony would be some form of valid oral tradition. But even in the Old Testament, you began to have scribes and Pharisees attempt to supplant that tradition with human rabbinical traditions. And so we trust, yes, that ultimately when Jesus established the apostles as a sort of princes of the church, when they set the church up, had the authority to decide what elements of the previous oral tradition were legitimate or illegitimate. And so that guided, for example, Paul, when he would craft, say, the liturgy that the church has, or the other apostles, right? When they would craft or write a liturgy, it would be guided by Old Testament tradition from the synagogue and from the temple worship. And they would also have, the insight and the divine illumination to know what aspects of rabbinical traditions were invalid. So it's I would say it's not a black or white thing. So there's good tradition and there's bad tradition. And we would say that the church has the mind of Christ, so it has a tendency, it has the discernment in every generation to know, whether what came in the previous generation is legitimate or not.
I see what you're saying. And so, okay. And so, kind of pivoting to the New Testament, something similar is, someone said this to me, because I've been trying to, again, I'm coming from the idea where, I don't believe in it, anymore, but I'm coming from the idea that the Injil and the Torah are corrupted, or, they're not academically reliable, whatever that even means in this, and the Islamic paradigm, which, is hypocritical, but whatever. So I'm coming,
yeah, I understand.
The miracles of Jesus, right? So someone posed me the question, they said, in ancient Rome, how would feeding 5,000 or turning water into wine or so on and so forth not be, written down or recorded in non-biblical, just Roman texts, just in terms of just ancient Rome recording, stuff and stuff like that, you know what I mean?
In other words, why wouldn't a Roman historian record that? I mean, the Roman historians were, Roman historians were unbelievers, so there's no reason why they would just assume that's a Jewish superstition or some sort of sectarian superstition. I mean, they did record, Titus and others record elements of, mentions of the name of Christ, but I mean, presumably because of unbelief.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's all kinds of other things. I mean, that's not the strongest argument either, because there's all kinds of things that Roman historians maybe didn't know about or didn't record, which I mean, we're not going to make our theology dependent upon whether a Roman historian mentioned it or not. But
Yeah.
the other thing too, I mean, look, I get what you're saying. So, and one thing that's different between like the Islamic view of the text and what we would say is the attitude is similar to kind of the way that the Jews view the Torah, right? So, like the Jews view the Torah as kind of the central locus of the religion. And so it's a very book-oriented religion. And for us, the book is still relevant, but it's not the focus of the religion, because Jesus says to the Pharisees in the book of John, he says, follow the scriptures because you think that it's in them that you have eternal life, when it is they that bear witness of me. And for the Orthodox Church, the church and the worship and the community are prior to the scriptures. They existed before the scriptures.
Yeah.
Paul says that the church is the pillar and ground of truth, not the written text. So the written texts are kind of like a letter. It's like the difference between knowing me and reading someone's letter about me.
Yeah.
In a sense, you can read the letter and know about me, but if you don't go to church and worship at the liturgy, you don't know Christ directly. That's the difference. And Islam thinks of it kind of like the way Jews think of the Torah, as like the book is kind of like the preeminent way that we interact with the deity. But for us, that's changed now that the New Testament and Christ has come. Now the primary way we interact with the deity is in the Eucharistic liturgy. And certainly the scriptures have a place, they have a role, but they're not the focus of the religion.
Right. And the thing with Islam too is, like, actually it mirrors like rabbinic Judaism a lot, like with the tafsir, like the exegesis and the oral, like,
correct.
That's the funny thing about it, is it really does mirror.
It does. And I mean, in Orthodox Christianity has elements of that as well, in that we do agree that there is an oral tradition that the apostles taught. They gave as tradition, namely the liturgy itself is an apostolic tradition that's not in the written books of the scriptures. But the point rather is that even scribal errors, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm saying the Bible's full of errors, even scribal errors are they're just later copyist errors that are very minor. When you look at the attestation to the New Testament text, there's thousands of New Testament texts with like 90 to 95% unanimity amongst them from the first several centuries of the church, which is far superior to any other historical document.
Right. I mean, okay, fair enough, yeah. And so, like, listen, I don't want to take too much of your time, well, I appreciate you.
No, they're good questions.
Thank you, Habib. I was going to ask you, so if I'm going to, if I want to look at this as rational as possible, or try to, right? Or like try to scrutinize as much as I could. I'm sure you hear this a lot. I know, like, you're a big proponent of tag, and I like tag, actually. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the best argument for God. So 2 questions. In regards to tag, would you say that, like, animals other than human beings have some sort of logic and rationale, and would that be credit to God, or does that affect the argument on any chance that, like, a dog can pick up on when, where the snacks are or something, and break it like a snack box.
Oh, I mean, they have instincts and they have a degree of instinctual reasoning, but we wouldn't say that they have reasoning as a faculty like humans have. No.
Yeah.
Because reasoning is one of the faculties that we would say is a constituent element of human nature, and animals have some smaller degree of that kind of stuff, but they don't have the faculty of reasoning. They just have they have instincts.
Yeah, and then secondly, like, when it comes to someone claiming, like, who caused God, like, everything in the creation, everything in the universe has a causation. I mean, who would cause God? And God the Father, not like not the Son or the Spirit. What would you say to that?
Well, I wouldn't accept the first premise that everything has a cause.
Yeah, why not?
Why should I accept that everything has a cause?
That's a great question that I never asked, to be honest.
Well, I mean, most of the classical argumentation just operates on sort of assumptions of ancient and medieval philosophy that were never questioned.
Right.
But I don't know how you would demonstrate that everything has a cause. I mean, if you're a Christian, God doesn't have a cause. So
I see what you're saying. Yeah, exactly. I see what you're saying. I mean, like.
But also, even from an empirical, like, let's say that you wanted to go with that classical line of argumentation, even if you're an empiricist and you're using empirical sense data, you don't actually know that everything has a cause. I mean, your
That's
sense
true.
data is limited, so how do you know everything has a cause?
That is true. Like empirically speaking, that is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so okay, so if it comes to, I'm just shotgunning, to be honest. I mean, you're like, listen, man, like not much people, like, to be honest, have answered some of my qualms with religion as much as you. So I'm just gonna straight up shotgun feed if you don't mind. Like, I'm not gonna be like obsessive about it. I'm just trying to see like what I
That's
can
fine.
rattle off that like I can't find an answer to myself. I mean, so if someone says like, if God is omniscient or he's all knowing, and he sends a revelation or a message or however you want to word it, and there is not a unanimity in how that message is received, like there is differences in how the message is received, is God at fault for not knowing that the human beings will receive it in a certain way and not accommodating for them to have unanimity? You get what I mean? Like, it's like if God is all knowing and he sends a message and not everyone receives it well, then how is he not at fault, for not catering that message to such,
Well, I mean, if he's created beings that have freedom and the beings can choose to listen or not listen or disobey or something like that, like why would that mean that he was in some way at fault? I mean, what he doesn't have to um I mean, if he can create a world where beings have freedom, then that seems to answer that question. I'm not understanding like what. In other words, it's almost like you're saying, well, in other words, you're asking why did he create beings that have free will? I mean, I don't know. I guess because you know, it's a better world if the beings choose to be with him rather than just being a computer program, I guess.
The thing, to be honest with you, that I like about the Orthodoxy is that they will straight up tell you, like, I don't know. Like, they will not try and claim to have an answer for it. Like, the thing with Catholics, like, I don't want to, like, rant here, but it's like, the problem is, like, I think when you don't take that approach and you just try to, make sense of everything when you, like, clearly can't, like, you just straight up said, I don't know. Like, that's a fair answer.
Yeah, I think that's true. There is Orthodoxy tends to have a little more humility, I think, in terms of understanding the limits of human reason and scholasticism. So there's just, like if you read the book of Job, the point of the book of Job is like some of these questions we'll never have answered in this life. So it's kind of, it's prideful to think that, oh, well, I'll give an answer. I don't know why God permitted evil, but I know that I have a basis at least to believe that there is a standard of good and evil if God exists. Whereas if I were to go the route of thinking that the problem of evil disproves God, well, then I'm in a position then that's no better because now there's no such thing as evil and all actions are equalized. So I'm not sure how that would put me in a better position if, and by the way, if all actions are equalized, then also I lose the ability to distinguish the true from the false because everything just is. So, yeah.
And then, like, just lastly here, I'll make it quite super quick, guys. But if you mentioned once, and here's the thing, right? It's like my biggest contingency, or one of my biggest contingencies with Christianity or the Christian thought was like what it meant for Jesus to die for your sins. Like, what sin did he die for? Like so on and so forth. And so, it wasn't until I actually came across your video on the Orthodox like paradigm. It's not like a pain because I kept getting fed this Protestant Roman Catholic.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
And I was just like, they keep saying it's just, but like it's really not just. It's the problem.
It just doesn't make sense because why would God need to be paid? Why would God need to be paid with a created thing, or why would God need to pay God off? Like all that stuff is stupid. So
it's just stupid. Like and so you touched on it a bit, but if you could explain, like, so let me correct me where I'm wrong. It's like we were created with the intention of theosis, right? And so
yes.
The problem was when mankind, Adam, when he went the other path, when he didn't listen to the divine decree, that opened the possibility for like not a state of not being with God, as in.
Well, let me put it this way: the easy way to think about it is when Adam and Eve rebelled, they basically made a covenant with Satan. So they basically kind of entered into a covenant with death. And in our view, ultimately, death is linked to the angel of death, who is Satan. So the fallen entity kind of invited Adam and Eve into his kingdom, and that's the kingdom that they joined. And so they were banished from paradise, and now they were subject to death and mortality and being under the dominion of the fallen angel that has the power of death. So what happens is that human nature is wounded. It now it prefers and tends towards the vices, and those vices are what we call the passions. And we don't mean passion in the sense of like, love story passion. It means the desires, the bodily desires. The bodily desires are out of whack, and so what happens is that Satan has control over us through enslaving us through those vices or those desires. So but we don't even think the desires themselves are bad. But like if I'm enslaved to them, then Satan has control of me because he's running my life with this or that vice. So what Christ did on the cross was not to pay off some sort of infinite debt that God expected from a created human nature, but rather to overcome that power by going into Hades. And so it's a kind of a lure that entrapped Satan by thinking that he could overcome God by destroying the Son of God on the cross, thereby inviting Satan, the Son of God, into the realm of death or Hades. And then in that realm, he destroys the power of death through our fallen human mortal nature. And so let me finish this part. So when he resurrects, our view is that he deifies the human nature that he assumed in the resurrection and the ascension. And so now when we partake of the Eucharist, we think that that is giving us the power to overcome the passions, which is what Satan used to keep us enslaved. And by doing that,
I see what you're saying.
in the resurrection, we will become deified sons of light, like Jesus is a son of God. Now, we're not sons by nature. He's the son by nature. We're sons by grace, but we can participate in that grace through what he did.
I see what you're saying. That's that's probably the best explanation I've got. Yeah, man. I mean, listen, man, like, you're great, honestly. Keep it up, And I see some of your political stuff, and I was just going to ask you if you can talk about, you can mention, I'm Syrian, but if you can mention, like, the whole Syria, like, the CIA. And I remember Joe Kant, like, yesterday, the day before, mentioned the whole, like, the PSYOP and everything. If you can just,
Yeah, I was writing about this PSYOP for 2021 Wire back in 2012, 13, 14, because we didn't know the name of it at the time, but it's now been declassified. It was Timber Sycamore, and this is,
Yes.
and we knew that the CIA was running this, obviously with Israel too, but
it's like, dude, like, it's so, like, I don't know how Muslims are just, they fall for it every time. It's like, these people are such brainless. It's like, how are you saying you oppose Israeli homogeny and then do the exact thing which imposes Israeli homogeny? Like, you idiot. Like, I just I don't want to rant here, like, in front of these people.
I don't,
it's so stupid, bro. Like, I just don't and, like, it's like, well, when you go back to the religion, like, at least Sunni Islam, like, the problem is that it's literally, like, caps critical thought and judgment. Like, it's like, you can't obey the wali, you can't disobey the ruler, you can't do this, you can't you know what I mean? Like,
it's a perfect cult. Sunni Islam is a perfect sort of death cult.
Yeah.
And they get used.
What hand you eat with, then, if you can, like, do it, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's what you're distracted with.
Right. Yeah, everybody should look up this New York Times article, and obviously I'm not a fan of the New York Times, but this is a huge admission of everything that we were talking about. Behind the sudden death of a $1 billion secret CIA war in Syria, Timber Sycamore here. Total vindication, by the way, of everything I talked about.
Like, and the funny thing about it is, like, when you talk to these people, where it's like that, like, it's like they have legitimately a zero shred of evidence that, like, to hold on. Like, we have documentation that prove that they're just straight up terrorists that were funded by Israel and the CIA.
Right.
Okay. We have documents. I mean, we have admittances from the CIA, from Israel, from them, even, to be quite honest with you. We have they're just, it's like the idea that, like, these Muslims have that, like, the U.S. and Israel get it wrong every time, but when it came to Syria, they got it right. It's just, like, hilarious. Like, you guys are such idiots. Like, and and I'm just ranting. I'm quite honest with you. But it's just like, dude, like, these people, like, I don't know, man. This is why I have like such a disdain for these like type of people. Like I
Yeah,
just
well,
can't.
I mean, I've always said the same thing. How do these? You would think these people would kind of figure it out, but yeah, I appreciate your questions, Stallion. Good questions.